Revenge doesn't taste like sweet victory. It tastes like stale coffee, copper pennies, and the exhaust fumes of a 1969 Chevelle. Lisa didn't want blood when she found out her fiancé was sleeping with his secretary while racking up 60 grand in her name. She just wanted him to hurt. So she posted his prized, custom-restored muscle car online for $1. She expected a broke teenager to show up. Instead, she got the man who owned her debt. The apartment smelled of bleach and failure. Lisa knelt on the scuffed hardwood floor, methodically tossing Derek's life into a bruised cardboard box, a half-empty bottle of cheap synthetic cologne, a stack of gaming magazines with curled, dog-eared pages, 3 pairs of gym shorts that still smelled faintly of stale sweat and laundry detergent. She worked in total silence, the only sound the persistent, hollow dripping of the kitchen faucet she had asked him to fix 6 months ago. It had been 48 hours since she found the text messages, 48 hours since she watched him pack a duffel bag, stammer out a pathetic excuse about needing space to find himself, and walk out the door. He didn't even have the spine to look her in the eye. She reached under the bed to pull out his discarded boots, her hand brushing against something cold and metallic, a heavy, fire-proof lockbox. Derek wasn't the type to secure his valuables. He was the type to leave his wallet at the bar and his social security card on the kitchen counter. Frowning, Lisa dragged the box into the grey, afternoon light filtering through the dirty living room window. It was locked. She didn't think twice. She walked to the kitchen, grabbed a meat tenderizer from the drawer, and brought it down on the cheap padlock. The metal cracked on the 3rd strike, sending a sharp, painful vibration up her forearm. She pried the lid open. Inside lay a neat stack of manila folders. Lisa pulled the first one out. Her fingers were dry, the paper rasping against her skin. It was a loan agreement. Crescent Financial, principal amount, $15,000. She flipped to the signature page. There, sitting ugly and blue on the dotted line, was her name. The loop of the N was too wide, the A too squashed. A forgery, a clumsy, desperate forgery. A cold, heavy rock settled at the bottom of her stomach. She opened the next folder. Vertex Lending. $22,000. Another forged signature. Another folder. Ironclad Credit. $31,400. Total. $68,400. Lisa stopped breathing. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, tasting vaguely of dust and panic. She sat back on her heels, the floorboards digging into her knees. Derek hadn't just cheated on her. He had systematically gutted her financial future, drained it, and abandoned the hollowed-out carcass for her to deal with. He had left her holding a bomb, and the timer was already at 0. At the very bottom of the lockbox lay one final document. A vehicle title. Her eyes scanned the crisp, green-tinted paper. It was for the 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SS, the car he spent every weekend waxing, the car he refused to let her drive because she didn't respect the machinery. According to the DMV transfer stamp in the top corner, he had transferred the title into her name 8 months ago, probably to hide the asset from the predatory lenders he was already dodging. He was stupid enough to leave the title behind in his rush to escape with his secretary. Lisa didn't scream. She didn't cry. The betrayal was too absolute, too structural for tears. Instead, a very quiet, very dark sort of clarity washed over her. She stood up, grabbed her keys from the bowl by the door, and walked down the 3 flights of stairs to the underground parking garage. The air down here was damp, smelling of old motor oil and concrete. The Chevelle sat in the corner, covered by a custom, breathable tarp. She grabbed the edge of the fabric and yanked it back. The cherry-red paint gleamed, flawless and obnoxious in the dim fluorescent light. The chrome bumper caught her reflection. Pale, exhausted, her brown hair pulled into a messy knot, wearing an oversized thrift store sweater that was fraying at the cuffs. Lisa pulled her phone from her pocket. She snapped 3 photos of the car, front, side, and the pristine black leather interior. She opened the local online classifieds. Title: 1969. Chevy Chevelle SS runs perfectly. Price: $1. Description: exact change only. Need it gone tonight. First come, first served. She hit post. She didn't care about the $68,000 right now. She couldn't process it. All she could process was the visceral, petty need to take the one thing in the world Derek actually loved and throw it into the dirt. Her phone chimed before she even reached the stairwell. An email. No subject line, I'll take it. Have the title ready. The abandoned lot behind the old shipyard on 4th. Midnight. It was signed simply, Reyes. It sounded sketchy. It sounded dangerous, but Lisa was already ruined. She had nothing left to lose but a car that wasn't really hers and a life that was already over. See you there, she typed back. The rain started at 11, a fine, freezing mist that turned the city streets into black mirrors. Lisa sat behind the steering wheel of the Chevelle, the engine idling with a low, muscular rumble that shook the floorboards. The heater barely worked, blowing a tepid, dusty breath against her freezing hands. The abandoned lot behind the shipyard was a graveyard of broken asphalt and rusted shipping containers. The only light came from a single, dying sodium lamp that buzzed like an angry hornet. She checked the dashboard clock. 11:58 p.m. Her foot hovered over the gas pedal. The cynical part of her brain, the part that usually kept her alive, was screaming at her to put the car in drive and leave. She was a woman sitting alone in a desolate industrial park at midnight, waiting to hand over a $50,000 classic car for a single piece of paper. It was madness. But then she remembered the forged signatures, the loop of that fake N. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. Let him lose the car. Let it burn. Headlights cut through the mist, blinding her for a second. She squinted against the glare as a matte black SUV rolled into the lot. It didn't bounce over the potholes. It seemed to glide over them, heavy and armored. It parked parallel to the Chevelle. The engine cut off. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Just the sound of the rain drumming against the Chevelle's metal roof. Then, the driver's side door of the SUV clicked open. The man who stepped out did not look like a mechanic looking for a steal, nor did he look like a broke college kid. He looked like the kind of man who owned the shadows he walked through. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark, tailored overcoat that absorbed the dim light. As he walked toward her window, Lisa noted the details. His gait was measured, unhurried. He didn't bother with an umbrella. The rain darkened his black hair, plastering it slightly against his forehead. Lisa rolled down her window. The smell of the river, mud, salt, and decaying wood spilled into the car, carrying with it the scent of wet wool and something metallic, like ozone, like impending weather. He stopped a foot from the door. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, jawline like a cut diamond, mouth set in a grim, flat line. But it was his eyes that made Lisa's breath catch in her throat. They were dark, assessing, and utterly void of warmth. They didn't look at her. They catalogued her. "Lisa," he said. His voice was a low rasp. It didn't ask. It stated, "You're Reyes," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. She gripped the manila envelope containing the title in her left hand. "Dominic." He glanced down at the hood of the car, then back to her. "You actually brought it." "I said I would." "People say a lot of things." He extended a hand. Lisa looked at it. His knuckles were scarred, the skin thick and rough. This wasn't the hand of a man who spent his life behind a desk. It was the hand of someone who used violence as a tool, as mundane as a hammer. She felt a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline. She held up the envelope. "Do you have the dollar?" she asked. A slow, humorless smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It didn't reach those dead eyes. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a single, crumpled $1 bill. He held it out. Lisa hesitated, then reached through the window. Their fingers brushed. His skin was freezing, rough as coarse grit sandpaper. She took the bill. It felt damp. George Washington stared up at her, looking as tired as she felt. She handed him the envelope with the title, already signed over, and the keys. "It's yours," she said, her voice tight. "Don't wrap it around a telephone pole, or do. I don't care." She reached for the door handle, preparing to step out into the rain and walk the 3 miles back to the nearest bus stop. It would be a miserable walk, but it would be over. "Stay in the car," Dominic said. Lisa froze. "The transaction is done. You have the title. I have the dollar." Dominic didn't move. He stood in the rain, perfectly still, looking down at her through the open window. "The transaction," he said softly, over the sound of the idling engine, "has barely started." He tapped the roof of the Chevelle twice with his knuckles. "Turn the engine off, Lisa. We need to talk about Derek." Her blood went to ice. The name hung in the damp air between them, ugly and heavy. "I don't know where he is," she said quickly, defensively. "And if you're one of his loan sharks, you're out of luck. He left me with nothing." "I know," Dominic said. He walked around the front of the car, his silhouette cutting through the glare of the SUV's headlights. He opened the passenger door and slid into the seat. The interior of the Chevelle instantly felt microscopic. He took up too much space. He smelled of rain, cold leather, and a very faint, very expensive cedar cologne that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of gunpowder. He closed the door. The sound sealed them in. "Turn off the engine," he repeated. Lisa reached forward and twisted the key. The heavy rumble died. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the glass. Lisa stared straight ahead through the water-streaked windshield. Her heart was beating so hard she felt it in her teeth. "If you're going to kill me," she said, her voice surprisingly flat, "do it outside. I don't want to die in this tacky interior." Dominic let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. "I'm not going to kill you, Lisa. You're worth far too much to me alive." He reached inside his coat again. This time, he pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. He tossed it onto the dashboard. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. "Open it," he commanded. Lisa hesitated, her fingers twitching against her thighs. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly despite her best efforts, and pulled the folder onto her lap. The leather was worn, soft from years of use. She flipped it open. Inside were photocopies of the same documents she had found in Derek's lockbox. Crescent Financial, Vertex Lending, Ironclad Credit. But there were more. Promissory notes scribbled on napkins, IOU contracts printed on cheap paper, signed in blood-red ink, and on every single one of them, nestled right beneath Derek's frantic, messy scrawl, was her forged signature. 68,000 to the legitimate bottom feeders, Dominic said, his voice a low hum in the dark car. Another 45 to the less legitimate ones. $113,400 in total. Lisa's throat closed up. The numbers didn't even make sense. It was monopoly money. It was a debt so large she couldn't even conceptualize paying it off. "I didn't sign these," she whispered, her voice cracking. It's a forgery. I can prove it. You could, Dominic agreed calmly. You could go to the police. You could hire a handwriting expert. You could spend 3 years in civil court fighting the debt collectors while they freeze your bank accounts, garnish your wages, and drag your name through the mud. He shifted in the seat, turning his body toward her. The leather creaked beneath him. But you won't, he continued, because those debts don't belong to the banks anymore. They belong to me. Lisa snapped her head to look at him. His face was a foot from hers, shadows pooling in the hollows of his cheeks. You bought my debt? She asked, the absurdity of the situation finally piercing through the panic. Why? Because Derek thought he was clever, Dominic said, his tone darkening, a rough edge of genuine malice bleeding through the calm facade. He borrowed money from a subsidiary of my organization. When he realized he couldn't pay, he took a $50,000 cash advance from another, bought this car, and tried to hide the asset by putting it in your name. Then he ran. He thought I'd write it off. He thought I wouldn't care. Dominic leaned in closer. Lisa pressed her back against the driver's side door, the cold glass biting through her sweater. I care deeply about my money, Dominic whispered. And I care even more about the principle of a rat thinking he can outsmart me. He reached out and tapped the folder in her lap with one calloused finger. I bought up all his paper. Every single dime he owed in this city, I now own. And according to the law, and more importantly, according to my ledger, you are the co-signer. You are the guarantor. Lisa stared at the scarred knuckle resting against the paper. A wave of profound, exhausted anger washed over her. It wasn't the fiery, petty rage that had made her list the car. It was a cold, dense fury. She grabbed the $1 bill from the center console and threw it at his chest. "Then take the damn car," she snapped, her voice rising, echoing in the cramped space. "Sell it. It covers half of it. I don't have the rest. I don't have anything. I work 40 hours a week managing a coffee shop that smells like burnt milk and shattered dreams. Look at me. Do I look like I have $100 grand hiding in my mattress?" Dominic watched the dollar bill flutter down to the floor mat. He didn't blink. He didn't react to her outburst. He just watched her, his dark eyes taking in the defiant jut of her chin, the messy hair, the absolute lack of fear that only comes from having nothing left to lose. "I don't want your money, Lisa," he said quietly. Lisa paused, her chest heaving. "Then what do you want?" "I want Derek." He reached down, picked up the dollar bill, and smoothed it out on his knee with deliberate, meticulous movements. "Derek is hiding. He thinks if he stays quiet long enough, I'll forget. I need to draw him out. I need him to realize that he can't escape." Dominic looked up, holding her gaze. "And to do that, I need to take the one thing he actually values, the one thing he thinks is safe." "You just bought his car for $1, Lisa said bitterly. "Congratulations. You've struck a devastating blow." "A car is a piece of metal. He can buy another one." Dominic's voice dropped, becoming gravelly, intimate. "But if I take his fiancée, if I take the woman he used as a shield, and I make her mine, that will insult his pride. That will bring him back." Lisa's breath hitched. "Make me yours," she repeated, the words tasting like ash. "What is this? The Dark Ages? You can't own a person." "I own your debt," Dominic corrected smoothly. "Which means I own your time. I own your apartment. I own the clothes on your back. You can either work for me until you pay off the $113,000, a process that will take you roughly the rest of your natural life." He paused, letting the reality of the threat sink into the damp, cold air. "Or," he continued softly, You can come with me tonight. You play the part of my collateral. You live in my house. You stand by my side. You let the word spread through the streets that Derek's woman now belongs to Dominic Reyes. And when he comes crawling out of whatever hole he's hiding in to reclaim his pride, I cancel your debt. Every penny. Lisa sat frozen. The rain hammered against the glass. The smell of his cologne was making her dizzy. It was a trap, a blatant, terrifying trap set by a man who looked like he had never lost a game in his life. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Dominic slowly reached out and picked up the keys to the Chevelle. He jingled them once, a harsh, metallic sound. "If you refuse, I get out of this car. I take my new property. And tomorrow morning, my lawyers freeze your bank accounts, evict you from your apartment, and garnish 90% of your wages until you die." He held out his hand, palm up. The scars across his skin looked white in the street lamp's glow. "The choice is yours, Lisa. Do you want to bleed to death slowly? Or do you want to help me catch the man who handed you the knife?" Lisa didn't take his hand. She looked at the thick, pale scars crossing his knuckles, and then past him, out the passenger window, at the rusted shipping containers bleeding orange streaks into the puddles. She thought about her apartment, the dripping faucet, the overdue electricity bill sitting on the counter, the smell of Derek's stale cologne lingering in the hallway. She thought about the sick, hollow feeling in her chest when she realized the man she planned to marry had used her name as a blank check. Then she looked back at Dominic. "I need to get my things," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the panic she felt buzzing at the base of her skull. "You don't," Dominic replied. He withdrew his hand, resting it on his thigh. "Whatever you need, I will provide. Going back to your apartment leaves a trail I'm not ready for Derek to follow yet. From this minute forward, you don't exist in your old life." "I have a cat," Lisa lied. She didn't know why she said it. A tiny, pathetic rebellion. A test to see if he was actually human. Dominic didn't blink. "Give my driver the keys. He'll take the animal to a shelter tomorrow morning, or a vet. Never mind, no cat." Lisa swallowed hard. The dry air in the car was making her throat ache. I can't just disappear." "You already have," he said softly. "You disappeared the moment Derek forged your signature on that first loan. He made you a ghost. I'm just giving you a house to haunt." He reached across her. For a split second, Lisa flinched, pressing herself hard against the door. But Dominic didn't touch her. He popped the latch on the glove compartment, pulled out a thick, black umbrella, and opened his door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the harsh smell of ozone and wet pavement. "Leave the keys in the ignition," he said, stepping out into the rain. He popped the umbrella. "My man will drive the Chevelle." Lisa sat there for 10 agonizing seconds. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She could put it in drive. She could slam the gas pedal, run him over, and keep driving until she hit the ocean. But she had $50 in her checking account and $100,000 hanging over her head. She turned off the ignition. She dropped the keys onto the driver's seat. They hit the leather with a soft, metallic clink. Stepping out of the Chevelle, the freezing rain immediately soaked through her cheap thrift store sweater. The cold was a shock to her system, sharp and sobering. Dominic was waiting for her by the heavy armored SUV. He held the umbrella out, creating a small, dry dome in the middle of the deluge. Lisa walked under it. She refused to look at him. She smelled the damp wool of his coat and the sharp, cedar spice of his skin. It was suffocatingly intimate. He opened the back door of the SUV. The interior was cavernous, smelling of rich, conditioned leather and ozone. Lisa climbed in, The door shut behind her with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud that made her ears pop. A man in a dark suit was sitting in the driver's seat. He didn't look back. He didn't say a word. Dominic slid into the seat beside her, tossing the wet umbrella into a custom compartment near the floorboards. "Drive," Dominic said. The SUV pulled away from the shipyard. Lisa watched the cherry-red Chevelle shrink in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed by the rain and the dark. The car she had weaponized. The car that had sealed her fate. The ride was a masterclass in silence. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. Lisa pressed her forehead against the chilled, tinted glass of the window, watching the city blur past. She was shivering. Her damp clothes clung to her skin, and her damp hair was plastered to her neck. She felt small, gritty, and entirely out of place against the pristine, soft leather of the seat. Dominic was working on a tablet. The pale blue light illuminated the sharp angles of his profile. He wasn't looking at her, but she knew he was entirely aware of her presence. It was the kind of hyper-awareness a predator has for a trapped animal. "You're shivering," he noted, his voice low, not looking up from the screen. "It's raining." "I'm wet," Lisa replied, pulling her damp sleeves over her hands. "I'm sure it violates some sort of upholstery clause in our new arrangement." Dominic tapped the glass of the tablet. "Turn the rear heat up, Leo." "Yes, boss," the driver grunted. A wave of dry, intense heat blasted from the vents near Lisa's feet. It felt good, but it made the smell of wet dog and stale coffee radiating from her clothes even more pronounced. She closed her eyes. She just wanted to sleep. She wanted to wake up and realize she was back in her terrible apartment, dealing with a dripping faucet and a broken heart. 40 minutes later, the SUV slowed. Lisa opened her eyes. They weren't pulling up to a sprawling, ornate Mafia mansion with iron gates and stone gargoyles. They were turning into the underground garage of a sleek, brutalist glass high-rise in the financial district. The garage was entirely empty, painted in bright white epoxy that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. The SUV parked near a private elevator bank. Dominic stepped out first. Lisa followed, her cheap sneakers squeaking loudly against the pristine floor. The sound echoed, humiliatingly loud. He keyed a code into the elevator panel, and the steel doors slid open. They stepped inside. The elevator didn't have buttons. It just went up. Fast. Lisa felt her stomach drop as they ascended, the pressure building in her ears again. When the doors opened, she stepped out into a penthouse that looked less like a home and more like a museum of hostility. It was massive, lined entirely with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering, rain-slicked city. The floors were poured dark concrete. The furniture was minimal, sharp, and primarily black leather and brushed steel. There were no pictures, no plants, no clutter, just empty, expensive space. It felt incredibly cold. "Leo will show you to your room," Dominic said, taking off his wet overcoat and hanging it over the back of a steel chair. He didn't offer to take hers. "There are clean clothes in the closet. The bathroom is stocked. Go to sleep, Lisa." He didn't wait for a response. He walked toward a heavy oak door at the far end of the room and disappeared behind it. Lisa stood in the middle of the vast, empty living room, dripping onto the concrete. The driver, Leo, cleared his throat. He was a mountain of a man with a squashed nose and dead eyes. "This way, miss," he said. Lisa followed him down a long, dimly lit hallway. He stopped at a door, opened it, and stepped back. "Don't wander," Leo advised, his voice a gravelly monotone. "The security system is active. You cross the wrong threshold, alarms go off. And the boss doesn't like alarms." He walked away. Lisa stepped into the room. It was huge. The bed alone looked like it could sleep 6 people. It was covered in crisp, white linens that looked like they had never been touched. She walked to the attached bathroom. Black marble, a shower the size of her old kitchen. She caught her reflection in the massive, backlit mirror. Her face was pale, her under-eyes bruised purple with exhaustion. Her hair was a tangled, damp mess. She looked like a stray dog someone had dragged into a palace. Slowly, she stripped off the damp, foul-smelling thrift store sweater and the wet jeans. She left them in a crumpled heap on the expensive black marble floor. She didn't care. She walked into the bedroom, opened a massive cedar-lined closet, and found a row of identical oversized black cotton t-shirts hanging neatly on wooden hangers. She pulled one down. It smelled faintly of laundry starch and Dominic's cedar cologne. She pulled it over her head, crawled into the center of the massive cold bed, and pulled the heavy duvet over her ears. She didn't cry. But as she lay there in the dark, listening to the absolute, terrifying silence of the penthouse, she finally admitted to herself just how terrified she was. Lisa woke up to the smell of burnt toast. For a fraction of a second, her brain tricked her. She thought she was back in her apartment. Derek always burned the toast. He was impatient, cranking the dial on the toaster to the maximum setting because he couldn't wait 3 minutes for breakfast. Then she opened her eyes. The floor-to-ceiling windows were flooding the room with stark, grayish morning light. The ceiling was 12 feet high. The sheets against her skin were heavy, slick, and undeniably expensive. She wasn't home. Derek was gone. She was collateral. Lisa sat up, her spine cracking in protest. Her mouth tasted like old pennies. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold concrete floor. She was still wearing Dominic's oversized black t-shirt. It hung down to her mid-thigh. She needed coffee. Desperately. She opened her bedroom door and peeked down the hallway. Empty. The penthouse was entirely silent, save for a very faint, rhythmic clicking sound coming from the main living area. Lisa padded down the hall, hugging her arms to her chest. As she rounded the corner into the kitchen, a sprawling monstrosity of stainless steel and black granite, she found the source of the smell and the noise. Dominic was standing by the island. He was wearing dark slacks and a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The harsh morning light caught the pale scars wrapping around his left forearm. He was typing on a laptop, his eyes fixed on the screen. Next to him sat a plate with 2 pieces of heavily charred bread and a French press full of dark, oily coffee. He didn't look up as she entered. "There's a mug in the cabinet to your left." Lisa paused. She hated that he knew she was there without looking. She walked to the cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a heavy ceramic mug. She walked over to the island. She didn't ask for permission. She poured herself a cup of the coffee. She took a sip. It was bitter, acidic, and aggressively strong. It was exactly what she needed. "You burned the toast," she said, leaning against the cold granite counter, clutching the warm mug with both hands. "I prefer it that way," Dominic replied, still typing. "You prefer it tasting like charcoal." "I prefer knowing it's fully cooked." He hit the enter key with a sharp tap and finally closed the laptop. He looked at her. In the daylight, Dominic Reyes looked less like a shadow and more like a very dangerous, very real man. The dark circles under his eyes matched hers. He looked tired, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying a heavy, violent weight for too long, not from a lack of sleep. He took in her appearance, the messy hair, his oversized shirt swallowing her frame, the defensive posture. A faint, almost imperceptible line formed between his eyebrows. "We have a schedule today," he said, picking up one of the blackened pieces of toast and taking a bite. The crunch was deafening in the quiet room. Arthur is coming at noon. He's a tailor. He's going to fit you for a wardrobe. Lisa tightened her grip on her mug. I have clothes. You have rags left on the floor of my guest bathroom, Dominic corrected mildly. You are supposed to be my new obsession, a woman I took from a man who owed me money. You cannot walk into my clubs wearing a moth-eaten sweater that smells like wet acrylic. The bluntness of the insult stung, but she swallowed it down. I don't know how to play an obsession. You don't have to, Dominic said. He leaned forward, resting his scarred forearms on the granite island. The distance between them shrank. I will play the obsession. You just have to play the part of a woman who realizes she traded a rusted penny for a gold brick. Lisa let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. A gold brick? Modest. You're a loan shark who bought a used car for $1 and blackmailed a barista. Let's not pretend you're a knight in shining armor. Dominic's eyes darkened. A slow, dangerous shift. He didn't raise his voice, but the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. I am not a knight, Lisa. I am the dragon. And Derek is the idiot who tried to steal from my hoard. He reached out, his fingers brushing the rim of her coffee mug. His skin was warm. Do not confuse your utility to me with immunity. You speak to me like that when we are alone. I tolerate it because I find your misplaced arrogance amusing. You speak to me like that in public, and I will have to remind you, and everyone watching, exactly who owns who. Lisa's breath caught. She stared at his hand on her mug. The threat wasn't loud, but it was heavy. Solid. She slowly pulled the mug back, breaking the contact. What exactly does public mean? It means tonight we go to the Cardinal, Dominic said, straightening up and adjusting his cuff. It's a private club. High stakes, high profile. Half the city's bottom feeders drink there. Word travels fast. By tomorrow morning, Derek will hear that his fiancée is wearing my money and sitting at my table. And if he doesn't care? Lisa asked, her voice cracking slightly. What if he's genuinely gone? What if he's relieved you took me off his hands? Dominic picked up his laptop and tucked it under his arm. Men like Derek don't love women, Lisa. They love possessions, Dominic said smoothly, walking toward the hallway. They love things that make them feel big. He didn't put the car in your name to protect you. He put it in your name so he could keep his toy. Taking you isn't about breaking his heart. It's about breaking his ego. And ego is the only thing that brings a coward out of hiding. He stopped at the threshold and looked back over his shoulder. Be ready by noon. Arthur doesn't like to wait. Lisa watched him disappear down the hall. She looked down at her coffee. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't shaking from fear anymore. She was shaking because Dominic was right about Derek. He hadn't loved her. He had loved that she paid the rent while he bought rims for his Chevelle. She took another sip of the bitter coffee. Fine. If Dominic wanted to use her as bait, she would be the best damn bait in the city. Let Derek come. Let him see what he did. She wanted to watch him burn, too. Arthur smelled of lavender soap, old peppermint, and judging condescension. He was a small, wire-thin man with a measuring tape draped perpetually around his neck like a priest's stole. He had arrived at precisely 11:59 a.m., accompanied by 2 silent assistants, carrying garment bags that looked heavier than Lisa herself. They had commandeered the living room. Dominic sat on a low leather sofa by the windows, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, watching the proceedings with the detached scrutiny of a man buying a racehorse. Lisa stood on a small wooden pedestal Arthur had brought, feeling entirely exposed. She was wearing a silk slip, provided by one of the assistants, that clung to her skin like cold water. It was a deep, bruised plum color. "Her posture is defensive," Arthur muttered around a mouthful of straight pins, tugging sharply at the hem of the slip. "Shoulders forward. Hiding. We need to build structure to force her upright. Boning in the bodice, perhaps." "No boning," Dominic said from the couch. His voice was lazy, but it carried across the large room effortlessly. "I want her soft. I want it to look like I can unwrap her with one hand." Lisa's stomach flipped, a hot, uncomfortable flush creeping up her neck. She glared at Dominic over Arthur's bald head. Dominic met her gaze over the rim of his glass, his expression entirely unreadable. "Soft," Arthur sighed, pulling a pin from his mouth and sticking it into the fabric near Lisa's hip. She flinched as the cold metal grazed her skin. "Soft is difficult when the canvas is rigid." "The canvas will adjust," Dominic said. Arthur snapped his fingers. One of the assistants rushed forward with a dress on a hanger. It was a heavy, emerald green velvet gown with a plunging neckline and a slit that went entirely too high up the thigh. "Put this on," Arthur commanded. Lisa stepped off the pedestal, took the dress, and retreated to the guest bathroom. She stripped off the plum silk and pulled the heavy velvet over her head. It was thick, lined with something incredibly smooth. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. It hugged her waist, flared slightly over her hips, and left her shoulders completely bare. She looked in the mirror. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. The thrift store sweaters and messy buns were gone. This woman looked expensive. She looked dangerous. She walked back out into the living room. Arthur nodded approvingly, stepping forward with his chalk, but Dominic stood up. "Leave us," Dominic said to the tailor. Arthur paused, his chalk hovering an inch from the velvet. "Sir, I need to mark the hem. I said, leave." Arthur didn't argue. He signaled his assistants, and within 30 seconds, the three of them had packed up their remaining bags and hurried out the front door. The heavy lock clicked shut behind them. The silence in the penthouse returned, thick and heavy. Dominic set his glass down on a side table. He walked slowly across the concrete floor, his eyes raking over her. The emerald green made her pale skin look almost luminous. Lisa felt the sudden, desperate urge to cross her arms over her chest, to hide. The dress left her feeling entirely exposed, despite the heavy fabric. She held her ground, forcing her hands to remain relaxed at her sides. Dominic stopped a foot away, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath mingling with the cedar. "You look uncomfortable," he observed, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "It's a lot of velvet," Lisa said dryly, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "And I'm not used to being dressed like a mobster's trophy." "You aren't a trophy," Dominic said. He reached out slowly. Lisa forced herself not to flinch. His hand hovered over her bare shoulder before his fingers finally made contact. His touch was shocking. His skin was rough, calloused, but incredibly warm against the cold air of the room. He didn't grip her. He just rested his hand there, a heavy, grounding weight. "Trophies sit on shelves and collect dust," Dominic murmured, stepping half an inch closer. The heat radiating from his body was palpable. "You are bait. Bait needs to look appetizing enough to make the prey forget the hook." He slid his hand slowly from her shoulder, trailing his rough fingertips up the side of her neck. Lisa swallowed hard. The sensory contradiction of him, the violent scars, the expensive clothes, the gentle, deliberate touch, was completely disorienting. "Tonight, at the club," Dominic said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "People will look at you. They will try to figure out who you are. They will look for weakness." His thumb brushed against her jawline. It wasn't a caress. It was an assessment. "If you shrink, if you hide behind me, They will assume you are a victim. A debt I collected, he continued. Derek will hear about a frightened girl. He won't care. He'll think he got away with it. Dominic stepped closer. The toes of his leather shoes touched hers. Lisa had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. But, Dominic whispered, leaning down so his mouth was inches from her ear, if you walk in there like you belong, if you look at me the way a woman looks at a man who gives her whatever she wants, Derek will hear that his fiancée didn't just move on. She leveled up. He will hear that another man is touching what he thought was his, and she likes it. He pulled back slightly, his hand moving to the small of her back, pressing firmly against the heavy velvet. He pulled her flush against his chest. Lisa gasped, a sharp intake of air as her body collided with the solid wall of his chest. That, Dominic said softly, watching the panic and the sudden, confusing spike of adrenaline war in her eyes, is what will bring him out. Do you understand the assignment, Lisa? Lisa looked up at him. She hated him. She hated Derek more. But standing here, pressed against a man who owned the shadows, smelling of whiskey and danger, she realized the most terrifying part wasn't the trap they were setting. It was how easily she felt herself fitting into the cage. I understand, she whispered. Dominic held her gaze for a long moment, his hand burning a brand into her lower back through the dress. Then, abruptly, he let her go and stepped back. The cold air rushed in to fill the space between them. Good, he said, adjusting his cuffs, the intimacy vanishing as quickly as a blown-out match. Put some heels on. We leave in 20 minutes. The Cardinal didn't have a sign. It didn't need one. It was tucked behind a windowless, black brick facade in the meatpacking district, guarded by two men whose suits cost more than Lisa's annual salary. Stepping inside felt like walking into a velvet-lined lung. The air was thick, suffocatingly hot, and heavy with the scent of unlit Cuban cigars, melted wax, and expensive bourbon. There was music, but it wasn't the thumping, synthetic bass of a regular nightclub. It was a live jazz band tucked into a dark corner, the low wail of a saxophone bleeding into the murmur of hushed, high-stakes conversations. Lisa's black stilettos sank into the plush crimson carpet. Her stomach was a knot of rusted wire. Dominic didn't offer his arm. He placed his hand on the small of her back, right where the velvet plunged. The heat of his palm seeped through the lining. It wasn't a gentle, guiding touch. It was a clamp, a territorial claim broadcasted to every set of eyes in the room. And there were many eyes. As they walked toward a raised, semicircular booth in the back, the room seemed to shift. Conversations didn't stop, but they snagged. Heads turned incrementally. Glasses hovered inches from mouths. Lisa felt the weight of their scrutiny like physical pressure against her skin. They were looking at Dominic with a mixture of deference and wariness, but they were looking at her like a puzzle they couldn't solve. Breathe, Dominic murmured, his voice barely audible over a snare drum roll. His breath grazed her ear, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. You're walking like you're heading to a firing squad. Feels like it, Lisa whispered back, keeping her eyes locked on the polished mahogany table ahead of them. They are bottom feeders, Lisa. They survive by knowing who has the power. Tonight, that's you. He slid into the booth first, pulling her down beside him on the tufted leather. The space was deliberately cramped. Her thigh pressed flush against his. She tried to subtly shift away, but Dominic's arm came to rest along the back of the booth, his fingers lightly curling around her bare shoulder. He pulled her back. A waitress materialized instantly, setting down a heavy crystal tumbler of amber liquid in front of Dominic and a delicate coupe glass filled with pale champagne in front of Lisa. Lisa didn't like champagne, She liked cheap, hoppy beer. But she picked up the glass. The condensation made her fingers slick. She took a sip. It tasted like cold metal and bruised apples. Dominic, a man, materialized by the edge of their table. He was older, wearing a charcoal pinstripe suit, with a face that looked like it had been punched a few too many times in its youth. His eyes immediately darted to Lisa, lingering just a second too long on the plunge of the emerald velvet. "Gideon," Dominic said. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer a hand. He just took a slow sip of his whiskey. "You're lingering." Gideon's smile was oily, failing to reach his eyes. "Just coming to pay my respects. I heard there was a shift in the neighborhood's portfolio. Didn't realize the new acquisitions were so striking." The implication hung in the air, thick and greasy. Lisa felt her heart kick against her ribs. She looked down at her champagne glass, the urge to shrink inward overwhelming her. Dominic's fingers tightened on her shoulder. Not enough to hurt, but enough to pull her attention. He shifted his gaze from Gideon to Lisa, deliberately ignoring the older man. "She isn't an acquisition, Gideon," Dominic said softly, his dark eyes tracing the line of Lisa's jaw. He reached out with his free hand, his rough thumb brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The contrast of his scarred skin against the delicate shell of her ear made her breath catch. "She's an upgrade." Dominic turned his head slowly back to Gideon. The lazy, detached demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, flat stare that made the temperature in the booth plummet. "And if you look at her like she has a price tag again, Gideon, I will remove your eyes and add them to my collection. Are we understood?" Gideon's oily smile vanished. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply against his silk collar. "Of course, Reyes. My apologies. To you both." He practically scurried backward into the crowd. Lisa let out a shaky breath, staring at Dominic. "Was that necessary?" "Every word," Dominic said, taking his hand from her hair and resting it on his thigh. "By midnight, Gideon will have told 3 people about the threat. By dawn, the whole district will know I'm ready to gut a made man over a barista. Derek will hear it, and his ego will not allow him to believe you are worth that kind of violence. He will come to see it for himself." Lisa looked out at the sea of tailored suits and glittering dresses. The jazz band shifted to a slow, mournful tune. "And what happens when he does?" she asked. Dominic turned to her. In the dim, red-tinted light of the club, his scars looked like shadows carved into stone. "We collect the debt," he said. It took 3 days, 72 hours of living in the suffocating luxury of the penthouse, 72 hours of wearing silk she didn't own, eating food she couldn't taste, and existing in a constant state of hyper-awareness. Dominic was rarely there during the day, leaving her to the echoing silence and the cold, sweeping views of the city. But at night, he was there. They didn't speak much. They existed in a strange, tense orbit. She would read in the living room. He would pore over files at the kitchen island. But she could feel him watching her. The air between them was always thick, charged with an undercurrent of violence, and something else she adamantly refused to name. On the 4th night, the rain returned. Lisa was standing by the window, watching the water streak the glass, when the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel door slid open. Leo stepped out first. His suit was wet. Behind him, being dragged by his collar by another of Dominic's men, was Derek. Lisa froze. Her first thought was that Derek looked smaller. When he lived in her apartment, taking up all the space with his video games and his loud, booming voice, he had seemed towering. Now, dumped roughly onto the poured concrete floor of the penthouse, he looked pathetic. His clothes were wrinkled and smelled of stale sweat and cheap beer. His hair was greasy. A bruise was blooming over his left cheekbone. Dominic stepped out of the shadows of the hallway, wearing a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly bored. "Look who decided to crawl out of the floorboards," Dominic said, walking slowly toward the center of the room. Derek scrambled to his knees, his eyes darting frantically around the massive, intimidating space. Then his gaze landed on Lisa. She hadn't moved from the window. She was wearing a simple dark slip dress Dominic had provided, her feet bare against the cold floor. But it was the way she stood, spine straight, chin level, unbothered, that made Derek's jaw drop. "Lisa!" he wheezed, scrambling to his feet before Leo shoved him hard back down to his knees. What are you doing here? They took you?" Lisa walked forward. She didn't feel the paralyzing fear she expected. She didn't feel the soul-crushing heartbreak she had drowned in 4 days ago. Looking at his panicked, sweaty face, all she felt was a profound, clinical disgust. "They didn't take me, Derek," she said, stopping a few feet away. Her voice was steady. "You sold me." "I didn't!" Derek spat, looking up at her with wild, desperate eyes. "I didn't sell you. I just needed time to get the cash together. You know I'm good for it. I was coming back. You left $113,000 of forged debt in a lockbox and ran away with a girl who wears too much vanilla perfume," Lisa corrected, her tone flat. "And you left the title to the Chevelle." At the mention of the car, a flash of genuine, ugly anger broke through Derek's panic. "You sold my car," he sneered, his true colors bleeding through the victim act. "I saw the listing. You stupid bitch. That car was worth 50 grand. It was an antique. You gave it away for $1? Lisa felt a sudden, sharp bark of laughter claw its way up her throat. He was on his knees in a mob boss's penthouse, bleeding, facing a man who could erase him from existence, and he was mad about the transmission. "Yes," Lisa said, a cold smile touching her lips. "I sold it for $1, and the man who bought it is the man you owe." She gestured slightly to Dominic. Derek finally looked away from Lisa and truly looked at Dominic. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving his skin a sickly, grayish white. "Reyes," Derek whispered. The bravado completely evaporated. "Look, Mr. Reyes, the money is gone," Dominic interrupted smoothly. He walked over to a side table and picked up the thick leather folder. He dropped it onto the floor in front of Derek. It hit the concrete with a heavy slap. "You took a cash advance from one of my lenders to buy a toy. You forged your fiancé's signature to shield yourself. You stole from me, Derek." "I'll pay it back, with interest," Derek begged, his voice cracking. He looked back at Lisa, his eyes wide with a manipulative, pleading look she had fallen for 100 times before. "Lisa, tell him. Tell him I'm good for it. We're getting married." Lisa looked down at him. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and absolute. "We aren't getting married, Derek," she said softly. "I don't even know you." Dominic stepped behind Lisa. He didn't touch her, but the proximity was a physical weight. His presence loomed over her shoulder, casting a long, dark shadow over the pathetic man on the floor. "She is no longer your shield," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, lethal register. "Her name is off the ledger, which leaves you and $113,000. Derek swallowed hard. I don't have it." "I know," Dominic replied, "which is why you're going to work it off. Leo." Leo stepped forward, grabbing Derek by the back of the collar and hauling him to his feet like a rag doll. Wait, no!" Derek thrashed, but it was useless against the massive driver. Lisa, please!" Don't let them take me. You owe me. I loved you." Lisa didn't blink. She watched as Leo dragged him toward the freight elevator at the back of the penthouse. "If you loved me," Lisa said, her voice carrying across the empty concrete space, cutting through his desperate screaming, "you would have fixed the kitchen faucet." The heavy steel doors closed, cutting off Derek's voice entirely. The silence rushed back in, ringing in Lisa's ears. Lisa stood staring at the closed elevator doors for a long time. Her chest was heaving, the adrenaline slowly leaching out of her bloodstream, leaving her hollow and exhausted. It was over. The bomb Derek had left in her lap had been diffused. He was gone, swallowed up by a world he was far too stupid to play in. She heard the soft scrape of leather against concrete. Dominic walked around her, stopping in her line of sight. He held out the thick leather folder. "The original notes," Dominic said. Lisa looked from the folder to his face. "What? The debt, your forged signatures, the physical copies, they're yours." He pushed the folder into her hands. "Burn them. Shred them. The digital files have already been wiped from my servers. The debt is clear." Lisa held the heavy leather binder. It felt like holding a brick. She opened it. There they were. Dozens of pages of lies, all bearing her name. She closed it, clutching it to her chest. "Just like that?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Just like that," Dominic confirmed. He turned away, walking toward the kitchen island. He picked up a bottle of bourbon and poured a neat measure into a crystal glass. "The transaction is complete. You played the bait. I caught the rat. You are no longer my collateral." He took a sip of the amber liquid, his back to her. "There is an envelope on the kitchen counter," he continued, his voice devoid of the dark, possessive heat it had carried in the club. It was strictly business, cold. "It contains $20,000 in cash, compensation for your time and the disruption to your life. Leo will drive you wherever you want to go. A hotel, your apartment. The airport. You are free to leave." Lisa stood rooted to the floor. Free. The word bounced around the vast, empty penthouse. It should have felt like taking a deep breath of fresh air. It should have felt like salvation. But looking at the stark, brutalist walls, and looking at the broad set of Dominic's shoulders facing away from her, all she felt was a sudden, terrifying gravity. She thought about her apartment, the dripping faucet, the smell of bleach, the crushing mediocrity of a life she had been perfectly content to endure until it was shattered. She looked down at the floor, where Derek had been kneeling. He was a boy playing with matches. But Dominic was the fire. He was ruthless, violent, and cold. He had bought her for $1. He had used her. But he hadn't lied to her. Not once. When he touched her, he didn't pretend it was out of soft, romantic affection. He owned his darkness. And in doing so, he had forced Lisa to acknowledge her own. She hadn't just listed the car to recoup money. She had done it to ruin Derek. She had worn the velvet dress not just out of fear, but because a dark, dormant part of her liked the power it gave her. She liked watching Gideon cower. She liked watching Derek realize she was unreachable. Lisa walked toward the kitchen island. She didn't look at the thick manila envelope sitting on the granite counter. Instead, she reached into the small, hidden pocket of her silk slip. Her fingers brushed against dry, crumpled paper. She pulled it out. Dominic turned around as she approached. He looked at the folder in her hand, expecting her to set it down and take the cash. Instead, Lisa set the folder on the counter. Then, she reached across the granite and placed a single, crumpled $1 bill next to his glass of bourbon. George Washington stared up at the ceiling, looking exhausted. Dominic looked at the bill. The faint, almost imperceptible line between his eyebrows appeared again. He looked up at her, his dark, dead eyes searching hers. "What is this?" he asked softly. "Change," Lisa said. Her voice was steady. She wasn't shivering. "You bought the car for $1. I'm buying my time back." Dominic didn't move. He stared at her, the silence stretching taut like a high wire. The smell of cedar, bourbon, and ozone filled the space between them. "I told you," Dominic said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, gravelly rumble that vibrated in her chest. "You are free to leave, Lisa. Take the money. Walk out that door. If you stay, you aren't collateral anymore. I won't treat you like a debt to be collected." He stepped closer to the counter, bridging the gap. His eyes darkened, the predator entirely surfacing. "If you stay," he whispered, "I keep you, and I don't share." Lisa looked at the pale scars wrapping around his knuckles. She looked at the man who had torn her ruined life down to the studs and offered her the ashes. It was a terrible idea. It was madness. She reached across the counter and pushed the manila envelope of cash back toward him. "I don't want the 20 grand, Lisa said, her eyes locking onto his, matching his intensity. "I want to know if you can fix a kitchen faucet." A slow, genuine smile, the first she had ever seen, broke the harsh lines of Dominic's face. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. He reached out, his rough, calloused hands gripping her waist, and lifted her over the cold granite counter, pulling her into the dark. If you felt the tension in this story, the gritty, high-stakes shift from shattered heartbreak to ruthless empowerment, hit that like button right now. Lisa didn't just survive betrayal, she weaponized it, trading a broken past for a man who owns the shadows. Want more deeply human, grounded Mafia romances, where the heroines bite back and the anti-heroes don't hold back? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken the $20,000 and run, or stayed for the danger? Share this video and join the family.